of the most ancient images of Jesus that we know of, is found on the order of service that you'll find a link to on the YouTube page. It's a picture of the 2nd century fresco of Christ the Good Shepherd from the Domitilla Catacomb in Rome. Clearly, the image that we heard of from John's Gospel today rang bells for the earliest Christians, just as it continues to do for us today, though maybe for different reasons. Jesus the Good Shepherd's become a bit of a cliche, not because it's a bad image, not at all, but because it's been so misused over time. Or perhaps not misused, but reinterpreted. Remember those lovely golden pastoral pictures from our Sunday school days of the shepherd leading his flock or carrying an apparently weightless lamb on his shoulders. And think how they combine with the words of the 23rd Psalm and the hymns which are versions of that psalm that we heard today. The Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want, the psalmist says. I shall lack nothing. He shall feed me in a green pasture, and so on. How lovely it would be to be a sheep in that shepherd's flock. Life would be so easy and so sweet. But the sentimental picture isn't what John wants us to have in our heads as we read that passage. Here, Jesus isn't speaking to his friends about the kind of lovely relationship he has with them, comforting and comfortable as it may seem. He's actually speaking to a group of Pharisees who were definitely not his friends, but who are challenging him about a healing miracle that he had just performed on the Sabbath. Their complaint is predictable. The miracle of giving sight to the blind was only possible through the intervention of God, but surely God wouldn't expect his agent to break the Sabbath law, even to alleviate suffering. This man Jesus was trouble, and that's why they challenged him. And yes, he was trouble, and so he argues back, presenting them with this picture of the shepherd who cares for the needs of the sheep, as he, Jesus, sets himself against them, the Pharisees. They clearly have no idea how to look after the needs of the people in their care. I am the good shepherd, Jesus says, and the implication is, of course, that they are not. I always feel sorry for Pharisees, guardians of the Jewish traditions and Jewish religious life. They were the ones who kept good order, who made sure people worshipped and behaved and prayed according to the rules and regulations. They were professional, religious people who did an important job to keep the community in good order. So you can imagine that those words from Jesus, as he compared himself with them, would have rankled at the very least. But what Jesus was offering them was a different way of caring for the flock, a different kind of pastoral care. Remember that the word pastoral is related to pastor and also to shepherd. The picture he describes is not one of clarity or regulation or good order, but a way of loving. It's a calling that's not just for pastors who are ordained, but for all of us who call ourselves Christians and who are ourselves part of the flock. And I think this is where our passage really speaks to us today in our church, because it's really about who we are as a community and about what kind of church we want to be. And it's particularly appropriate perhaps on the day when we have our annual meetings and look again at our ministry and work as a parish church together. Jesus tells us what being a good shepherd means. First, he says, I know my own and my own know me. They know my voice and I call them by name. This is a relationship that's personal, where people are remembered as individuals to be cared for, not just a flock of seemingly identical sheep to be herded. It's a relationship that's lived out over time as people get to know each other, as they get to understand what makes the other person tick. It might be called pastoral care, but of course more commonly it's called friendship. Friendships have been so important to us in the past year, and particularly those long-standing ones that have stood the test of time, even at a distance. But what about the new relationships that still need to form with those who have come new to our church? How will we learn their names, enable them to hear and know the voice of Jesus among us, as we move out of lockdown back to the green pastures where we safely graze? Jesus says, I lay down my life for the sheep. He reminds us that the kind of love that counts is the kind that sticks with someone through thick and thin, that requires a degree of self-denial and personal cost, a degree of sacrifice. Didn't Jesus tell his friends elsewhere that there is no greater love than to lay down one's life for one's friends? What is the cost of our friendships here at St. Mary's, in terms of time and energy, of love and self-giving? How much are we asked to lay down our lives for each other, for our neighbours? Perhaps we've learned more about that in the last months than we dreamed possible as we stayed home and kept our distance and done what was necessary to keep each other, to keep our neighbours well and safe. What will it look like as we move towards what we hope will be the end of the pandemic and will be free to roam? Finally, the Good Shepherd is one who welcomes the sheep and gathers them in. Jesus says that there are other sheep not of this fold, that he must gather them in as well, so that they too can hear his voice, so that there can be one flock with one shepherd. Central to our love and friendship is the slow and patient work of hospitality and reconciliation, and the sometimes painful work of overcoming barriers that lead to fear and prejudice. This is one of the hardest things that we're called to as followers of Jesus, our shepherd, requiring a good deal of humility and faith. So what might that mean for us at St. Mary's? Well, maybe it means looking around to see who is not part of our fellowship, the ones who never walk through our door, the ones who can't imagine being welcomed, the ones who don't even know we exist, not to mention the ones who've been unable to come because of sickness or isolation or disability. Jesus talks about the hired hands who don't care for the sheep. What about the people who don't know that God has a care for them because they've never experienced the care of God's people? We gather every week in church or online, and indeed on paper, to offer our prayers and thanksgivings to God, for our church and for each other. And we rejoice that we have a good shepherd, Jesus, who does indeed lead us and care for us. Let's also pray that we will know his voice as he calls us to follow him where he leads, and to love and care like him on the way, in our church, in our parish, and wherever else we find ourselves day by day. Amen.